Special abilities for our ministry in Jamaica.
Good day, everyone. This is Professor Theo, aka Pastor Theo, aka Dr. Theo, aka Just Theo. I hope you all are enjoying your summer breaks. And I know for each of us, a summer break may look a little bit different depending upon what it is we're trying to get accomplished this summer. So far, my summer has mainly involved doing a lot of yard work, cutting grass, pulling weeds, different projects outside, a little traveling, and then of course ministering at the church and preparing for this trip. So I hope whatever it is that you set out and purpose to do this summer, that you're having the opportunity to get that accomplished. I want to continue the series of videos that I've been shooting to help prepare our hearts and minds regarding those abilities that I believe that God is most concerned with in our lives, especially when it comes to ministry. Video number 1, we combine two abilities: availability and accessibility. And then the last video number 2, dealt with responsibility. And so we're going to continue in that same vein with this particular video, when we're going to be dealing with accountability. And there's lots of definitions for accountability. And if you look in the definitions inside dictionaries, a lot of definitions use the word accountable, the act of holding someone accountable. But then you need to figure out, what does that even mean? And so I'm not a big fan of definitions that have the word within the definition, and so without defining the word. So if accountability is holding someone accountable, you still need to know what it means to hold someone accountable. So I think a very generic understanding would be to hold people to doing that which they set out to do. So what is it that we're going to be setting out to do on this particular trip? What's some of the goals, some of the purpose for the trip? What are some things we want to accomplish in terms of growing in our individual walks, growing in our collective walks, being a blessing to those in Jamaica, especially the young people at the campers, at the camp. But there could be other things that come up spontaneously as we interact with people from Jamaica that we didn't know we were going to interact with on the side of the road or in the airport. The bus driver, we're going to have time with the bus driver going from the airport to more than likely Kingston for food, and then from there to the camp, and then from the camp to Mo Bay. So it's going to be awesome opportunities to do ministry, and it's not all going to be the type of ministry that we knew we would be doing. Some of it may be ministries that we didn't even fathom that could take place. Yet there is an idea that we'll have in terms of what we plan to do, how we plan to do it, what we plan in terms of our disposition, our demeanor, our spirits. So all of these videos and all of the team building and what you're doing as individuals, it's all helping to prepare us to be a certain way and to do a certain thing. Well, that's the plan. But what happens with even the best laid plans is that we sometimes can get off track. It could be because of circumstances, things externally that we can't control. And it could be in terms of things that we can control, our attitudes, our moods, different things of that nature. But in order to stick to the plans, in order to accomplish the purpose that we set out to accomplish to the best of our abilities, one of the things we can do is to hold ourselves accountable, allow others to hold us accountable, and us also hold others accountable. Which meaning holding us to, are you being who you said you wanted to be on this trip? Are you doing what you said you want to do on this trip? Are we as a collective being and doing the things that we set out to do? So when Erica and I had this conversation last summer, I believe it was when we first reconnected, hey, remember the good old days, Jamaica? Hey, and she asked, do they still do those type of task force trips? And I was like, well, as a college, they're not as frequent, but a lot of athletic teams do. And so we even back then say it'd be great to go and do another trip for these particular reasons. And one of the reasons she stated was that, hey, she enjoyed her time 20 years ago when my wife and I, when Nicole and I were in Jamaica, we were living in Jamaica when Coach Erica came. And so this is the 20-year anniversary of that trip. And she wanted you all, her players, to be able to experience that. But it can't just be the experience of the country Jamaica. It's the experience of growing, having faith being challenged, getting outside of comfort zones, serving others. All those things become part of what she wants you all to experience, and now becomes the task of making sure when we get there that we are who we said we were, and we do what we say we're going to do. And how do we hold each other accountable to that? So I want to share two brief passages that have different approaches to how that accountability looks like. The first is going to be in the book of 1 Thessalonians, chapter 1, and I'm not reading the whole passage, but Thessalonians chapter 1, Paul is writing to the church of Thessalonica, and he encouraged them not only to do well, he actually encourages them to continue to do well. This was a church that he wrote to, unlike the church in Corinth, where he really admonished them on some of their false doctrines and inappropriate behaviors and misuse of all types of things. When it comes to the church in Thessalonica, he actually says, it's been brought to my attention that you've been doing things well, and I want to encourage you all to continue to do something well. And it sort of reminds me of a brother of ours at church who had us reading this leadership book for the men's group. And in it, one of the things that it encouraged us to do was to catch someone doing well. And the whole notion is, oftentimes when we're micromanaging, oftentimes when we're looking at people's behaviors, we're normally doing so, whether we admit it or not, it's the natural tendency. We say, aha, I caught you doing this thing, and we point out the negative things. So they could have done 10 things in a row well, 10 things that were pleasing to you, 10 things that gave you joy, and things of that nature. And you may say thank you, but not much beyond that. Yet the moment they do something negative, there's a whole discourse surrounding that. And in communication, we talk about the principle of negativity. We normally gravitate towards the negative, which is why we see so much of it on the news. Well, this book talked about catching someone doing well. Be on the lookout for when someone does something well, and then acknowledge that. Let them know, aha, I caught you. You did something that was great. And give them props, give them encouragement. That's a part of accountability, because they set out to do well. But sometimes when we set out to do well, when people don't acknowledge our well-doing, it drains us, and we're more apt to not do as well. And then as soon as we slack off, people start to acknowledge the slack off. And so in the book of 1 Thessalonians, in chapter 1, beginning in verse 2, Paul says, we give thanks to God always for you, making mention of you in our prayers, remembering without ceasing your work of faith, your labor of love, and patience of hope in our Lord Jesus Christ, in the sight of our God and Father. So it says, we remember without ceasing your work. When we go on this trip, we're going to put in a lot of work. We're going to do some good works. it'd be great if someone, and it doesn't have to be externally, but even amongst ourselves, to say, hey, I saw what you were doing. I saw how you really stepped up. I thought that was cool, the way you brought that youngster to your side and really looked out for him the rest of the day after they got hurt or whatever, when they lost the race and you gave them encouragement, or whatever it may be. Catch someone doing something good. Catch someone doing something good. That should become the norm versus saying, aha, I see you doing something you shouldn't be doing. So Paul says, we remember without ceasing your work, your labor of love, your faith. And so someone set out to do those things. They started doing those things. And Paul was mindful to encourage them by recognizing, I see you. Or it's been brought to my attention, because even when he wasn't there in the flesh, he would get these reports. So it's been brought to my attention. And forgive me for all the sirens. We're not too far from a fire station. Forgive me, says, I hear what you've been doing. In the same way I write letters to Corinthians or some other church about what they're not doing well, I would be hypocritical not to write a letter to you all to say, keep going, keep doing it. And he wrote similar letters to the church in Philippi, to the church in Colossus. And so we want to hold each other accountable by encouraging each other. Hey, I saw what you did. That was great. Because that energizes someone to do it again. It lets them know, although the motivation wasn't to get the pat on the back, naturally speaking, we all love the pat on the back. We love it when people say good job. And so let us normalize holding people accountable, not with an iron fist, but with a thumbs up by saying great job. But sometimes we do need the thumbs up, the hug, the high five. But then there's other times where maybe we need the kick in the butt to hold us accountable. We were told what we needed to do and we set out to do those things, but then we slacked off for whatever reason. And now there's an opportunity to be a little bit more firm in our accountability style. So Paul, once again, he did write the letters that he wrote in terms of encouragement, but he also had times when he had to be a little bit more stern. So I want to briefly share with us in the book of Galatians, chapter 2, looking at verses 1 through 16. And to give some background, you had the Apostle Peter, one of Jesus' first disciples, who at one point in time, because of the culture he grew up in, being someone who kept the law, he would not interact with Gentiles. And then God had to deal with Peter in this particular situation when it was time for the gospel to be opened up to the Gentiles. And Peter has this vision where he sees all this meat that would have been typically unclean, and the Spirit of God tells Peter to rise, kill, and eat. And he was like, no, I can't eat any of this stuff. It's unclean. And God says, don't you dare call anything unclean that I've made clean. And it wasn't about the meat per se. It was really about Peter going to the Gentiles. We made that Peter goes to the house of a centurion named Cornelius. And Cornelius' whole household hears the gospel and gets saved. But God had to deal with Peter in regards to his interaction with the Gentiles. So fast forward, now Peter is interacting with these Gentiles. He's helping them navigate this new church culture, this new Christianity, and he's doing it well. But whenever the Jews would come around, Peter would then begin to flip out and switch things up, because he was afraid what the Jews were going to say when they saw him interacting with these Gentiles. So then he would try to get the Gentiles to act like the Jews. Hey, start practicing the law, which would have been a hindrance to these Gentiles to now start practicing this Judaic law. So word gets back to Paul that Peter was being hypocritical, and he calls Peter out in this. And we find this in Galatians 2, starting in verse 11. It says, now when Peter had come to Antioch, this is Paul speaking, he says, I withstood him to his face, or I stood up to him, I called him out to his face, because he was to be blamed. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision, that would be those Jews. And the rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter, before them all, so in the presence of everyone else, so he didn't pull Peter out to the side. This Peter was doing something publicly that was causing a hindrance, that was sending mixed messages. And since this was a public offense, Paul doesn't issue a private rebuke. He says, no, you were doing this in front of everybody, and you misled some people to the point that even Barnabas start doing some of the stuff that you were doing. So, and that's when you know you're in getting in trouble, that it's all right if we need to do what we need to do while on this trip, to take a break, and we may be having some fatigue that sets in, or we may be having a bad day. That can happen to all of us. But unfortunately, when we are in a spotlight, which it may be on us to a certain extent, because we're going to be these foreigners coming to serve, people are going to be watching us, all of a sudden now what we do becomes paramount, because what we do may send the message to others that they can do the same thing also. And so it's going to be important that we don't do those types of things. So Paul rebukes Peter publicly. And he says, if you being a Jew live in the manner of Gentiles and not as Jews, because Peter was starting to adopt some of the Gentile ways in terms of not adhering to the law. And he was doing that to endear himself to the Gentiles. But Paul says, if you're going to do that, why do you then compel Gentiles to live as Jews? So when the Jews aren't around, you're with the Gentiles and you're doing what you should be doing. But as soon as the Jews come around, all of a sudden you're like, okay, now Gentiles, let's act like the Jews. And they're like, hold on, we were just over here doing this. And now all of a sudden you want us to start acting this way? Oh, you're doing that to impress them because you're afraid of what they're going to say. And so Paul calls him out on this and holds him accountable. You set out to endear yourself to these Gentiles, that they may receive the gospel, that they would not be put into bondage with the law. You were doing well, and I commend you for the doing well, but then you flipped the script when the Jews came around because you were afraid of what they were going to think, and then you almost caused the Gentiles to get into bondage. And Paul says, although I point out how you're doing well, I also got to hold you accountable and point out the times when you're not doing well. And that's going to be important on this trip, that we find that balance. We encourage each other. We hold each other accountable by encouragement. But there may be times we have to hold each other accountable by saying, hey, let's remember why we're here. We're going to have plenty of opportunity over here to do this and do this. But while we're right here, let's do this. And we're going to need that encouragement. And we're going to do so in love. Because we can't just have the availability and accessibility and responsibility without having the accountability. All right. So this was a little bit longer lesson than normal, but I think it's a very important one because there is a lack of accountability in a lot of circles. And most of us who get off track is not simply that we as individuals are getting off track, but we as individuals are getting off track and we don't have people around us to hold us accountable. And we need it in our marriages. You all need it. Think about it in terms of athletics. When someone's not running the lines, when someone's missing their assignment academically. It takes a village to be successful, and it also takes a village to allow someone to fail. You can't fail as a team, as an individual on a team, without the parts of the team being involved in that failure. If any of you as a volleyball player on the team fails, it's on that person, but it's also on the rest. The coaches, staff, the other players, the whole village. And so the same way it takes a village to be successful, it takes a village to allow someone to fail. And we're not going to do that on this particular trip. We're going to rally around each other, pick up the slack from one another, keep each other encouraged as well as accountable. All right, ladies and the gentlemen, it's been a pleasure spending this time with you all. Hope you're getting something out of these videos. We talked about that availability, accessibility, responsibility, and now accountability. And then next video, we're gonna deal with the last ability, which is gonna be flexibility, which is uber important on any trip, and it's uber important just in life in general. Take care. God bless.